guys, it's Chris, the Natural Progressive. I am here today with Lord Hugh or a Dumbass, his YouTube channel. And if you are not subscribed to Lord Hugh or a Dumbass, you are a dumbass. Um, welcome, Hugh. Say hi, and then I would like you to go into a little bit of your background so people know your credentials or your expertise and so on.
Okay, that's going to be quick because I have virtually no expertise, no credentials whatsoever.
Me either, but whatever.
Anyway, it's nice to meet you, Chris. Finally, I've seen a lot of your stuff, and I've been running a channel for about a year, trying to do kind of an experiment in activism that didn't really work, didn't really pan out, but it's kind of morphed into sort of a lifestyle. And part of the lifestyle has wound up being, harassing XR and basically trying to be the gadfly on the gadfly. You know what I mean?
Right. So, what was like the motivating factor to get you into doing this, and what did you find out that like I have to talk about this?
Yeah, so I really kind of got worried in about 2012, and I started doing this alternate reality game as a kind of a way of waking people up and a kind of novel form of activism. But I went until last year. I thought I was getting all of it together. It took me about 5 years to get together. In the meantime, I sold up in Seattle and took to sea. So I've been sailing ever since 2016. And I thought I'd go to sea and then basically run this alternate reality game as a puppet master, and use it to get people into almost a cult, really, I guess, of drag people down the rabbit hole of thinking differently about basically the climate crisis and just how bad I thought things were. But I got kind of caught out in 2018. By the end of 2018, I started promoting. I did a year of videos. I did about 10 videos actually, and then I thought I'd start promoting them on social media. And I went out on social media, and I suddenly realized that I was completely out of touch and way behind where everybody's thinking was. I thought everybody was pretty close to where I was. And I suddenly got a big shock because I realized it's kind of a psychological problem turning it around. And we haven't got very long to do it. And when I suddenly realized, hang on a minute, where these people are now, there just isn't enough time to turn around psychologically. That we have to be such a transformation that I suddenly realized it isn't going to happen. And for the last year, I've been kind of pitched into doomerism.
Me too.
And it's got worse because since that epiphany that we're not going to make it has got worse because I've got deeper into the science and into the news, and it gets worse and worse all the time. So it looks like we've passed tipping points and stuff now. So it's just getting more and more bleak. But anyway, I still hold on to this kind of belief that it's not a binary switch. Everybody goes a bit binary, especially in the doomosphere, I think. And I think, well, if there's no hope, then we just keel over and die. And
I can't be there, though. I mean, I don't have any hope, mind you, but I'm not going to just stop talking about it, stop trying to make people understand.
Yeah, well, I think you and I think the same way, and that's that, you don't want to be too anthropocentric about it, and it's not all about us.
Right.
So, yeah, it's kind of, this Guy McPherson thing about, we can't do anything because our hands are tied because of the McPherson paradox, and if we drop global dimming, that'll bring on our extinction faster. And it's like, yeah, but is it just about us avoiding extinction or avoiding collapse or something? It's like we've got a whole ecosystem, and there's a lot of graduations on it. Every micro degree that we actually keep the temperature down is, probably a bit of ecosystem and a few species that survive. And I mean, I'm not, a misanthrope, and that's the other thing is you get a lot of misanthropy, and you say, well, this civilization doesn't deserve to live. People aren't worth saving. And I must admit, after hacking away on Reddit and stuff, I do get to the point where I think, this civilization, I mean, these people are really not worth saving. They couldn't save themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's the sad part is, gosh, did the humans deserve to keep going if they keep going along the way they are with absolutely no concern for the rest of the planet? It's just all about them, not even realizing, and it's logical that the rest of the planet is not going to survive if we just keep taking and taking and taking from it and polluting it. I mean, we're taking nature and turning it into garbage, basically, from the food, water, and air. All of that is is just being destroyed, and then you'll have they'll sit there and blame it on the individual, which we all have individual responsibility, yes, but what good does it do for me not to idle my car? Not that I do, but if they're the coal plant operating a county away is pouring all that pollution into the air and polluting and mining and destroying the land and the water from mining it and processing it and transporting it, don't you think they should be focusing on bigger things? And they never talk about preserving the wild and rewilding in all the talks with the Green New Deal. That is, in fact, it will do exactly the opposite, and that's really one of the things I wanted to get into with you today.
Yeah, you touched on this with Derek Jensen, didn't you? That it's really an economic stimulus package, and that's what I've been trying to get people to realize. That there's an ironic thing in telling really kind of Whiggish, hopeful liberals that believe that it's I think there's a big thing that people primarily believe that climate action involves something about recycling, just getting green infrastructure, new sources of clean energy, getting work and home
equity and all
insulated, and stuff like that. And it's like it's got nothing at all really to do with those things. Those are really peripheral. It's really got to do with land use, and particularly the oceans. And I get really upset about the oceans because now I live on the oceans, and I'm actually in touch with nature. I think sailors are probably more in touch with nature than anybody these days, liveaboard sailors. And people talk about the ocean as if it's just a side issue, especially economists. They treat it as if it's an externality. So when you talk about geoengineering and acidification of the oceans, this crazy guy, this Dr. Strangelove guy called Keith, Dr. Keith, he wants to do solar radiation management with sulfates. He says, well, we have to do this at some stage, and sure, we sacrifice the oceans because of acidification, but it's kind of like you have to just make the bargain. And I'm thinking that it's so upside down that to me, life on land is an extension of the oceans. If the oceans are where life came from, and it's where life is, basically, we as species go extinct, they'll fall back to the oceans. If you undermine the oceans, you're undermining the foundations of all life. But economists talk about it as if it's, well, there are going to be impacts on agricultural and fisheries, and we'll have to see about replacing aquaculture, but there are substitutes. And you say, like, are you seriously kidding that all an ocean is to you? Like people like Stieglitz and these guys, is all the ocean is to them is, basically, sea fisheries and aquaculture. And you think, like, seriously, dude, we're going to die. We are absolutely going to die if these people are given Nobel Prizes for saying this horseshit.
Right.
Actually, horseshit is nutritious, so they're not saying that.
Yeah, and the thing is, if you're only focusing on fisheries and not focusing on the whole entire ecosystem, the whole ecosystem is going to collapse anyway. So you see
But
all these.
they're talking about using the oceans for genetic engineering, like seeding with kelp. The primary thing why you can't do these things like kelp and seeding the oceans with iron and stuff is because what economists don't understand about technology, they're completely technologically blind. They kind of technological infants, and they see technology as kind of this magic gift-giving cow that always, that never stops giving. It's kind of the giving tree for them, but they don't understand it at all. And the primary thing that I've said quite a lot these days is what they don't understand is is that technology allows you to exchange limits. What we're really doing is rearranging stuff. The economy is a bigger rearrangement of stuff. You take stuff out of the ground, and then basically you rearrange it into a car, and then that car rusts, and you put it in a landfill, and then it turns to rust. And basically the whole economy is a big rearrangement where you take carbon and iron, and you do a huge oxidation reaction, and they become rust and CO2. And that's pretty much all an economy is. But to an economist, they kind of prestigitators where they pull rabbits out of the hat. So to them, you pull, material out of the ground, commodities out of the ground. Then they suddenly appear for the first time. You make them into commodities that now they have extra value. And then basically they depreciate and they go off the balance sheet into Never Never Land. And it's like, that's such an infantile way of looking at physics. And basically what it doesn't allow for is the fact that when technology comes along, you make a technological breakthrough. All you're doing is saying, okay, we've reached the limit on how much CO2, say, we can put into the atmosphere. We've saturated basically the footprint that we can allow in emissions, or we've saturated the source, so we ran out of copper or something. And then you substitute something else, but that's all you're doing.
Right.
So if you say we're going to do kelp, then you say, well, we're going to draw CO2 out of the oceans, but there's a good reason why the oceans aren't covered with kelp already, and that's because they had a limit of iron. So then they say, oh, well, that's okay. We can seed the oceans with iron. But you can't just seed the ocean with iron because basically the kelp is also a dynamic system that then has, it's a monoculture. You're essentially putting a marine monocrop of kelp.
Yeah, and we know
There's
how
going to be
well
a diet.
monocultures have worked on land.
Yeah, the kelp in California is dying off because of microbes and things. You one disaster away from an algal bloom that kills all the kelp. It'll all be released as methane. So everything you've sequestered and happily done, and basically you've got your carbon write-off, and it all works within the carbon economy. And there's some company that's basically claiming carbon credits because they put in kelp. That all basically in one day will float to the surface as this morass of, basically turn into methane in one shot. And so it's terribly, terribly dangerous that these economists are telling us that we can look at the eco-resources and say no, the solution is market forces. Adam Smith was right. Everything is the invisible hand. You just let free markets sort everything else out. What's wrong is the pricing is wrong. That's what the economists say. And they say that we're not pricing carbon appropriately, so we need carbon taxes to price that properly. And then we're not pricing the environmental, basically the ecosystem appropriately. So then we must put a proper price on the oceans and the fish and everything. And you say, okay, this is wrong from 2 points of view. One of them is what Guy McPherson talks about, and that's that what's the price of the last songbird? You can't. It's fatal to actually start pricing bits of the ecology because you've got crucial bits of the ecology that we rely on, and then you're putting a dollar price on them. You soon get to absurd things where you say, well, the last songbird is probably worth, maybe $3 million. So therefore, we can afford to lose $3 million because it doesn't affect GDP. You're going to get to all of these kind of absurdities if you think this way. And if you put taxes on things to increase carbon, all you're doing is you're exporting manufacturing
from one place to the other. It just changes the distribution.
Exactly. Again, it's an exchange. They don't understand that you're just exporting the carbon footprint to China and to the Belt and Road Initiative. And then they say, well, no, we'll put on border taxes, so we'll have carbon taxes at the border. So then, we'll punish those countries for not being, basically carbon efficient. They say, like, look, the Belt and Road Initiative is 124 countries. They already have a critical mass. They're already flying. They do not need us and our precious little egos in the West, where we think that the Chinese are coolies that manufacture stuff for us and we can punish them with tariffs.
Here. They're in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, no, China's exceeded us. China and the Belt and Road, they are the economy now. So all these conceited Western guys who think of these, in these kind of, basically racist terms that we can punish the Chinese with border taxes. It's like, it reminds me of back in the day when Britain was so important, and that little island had such self-importance that there's the famous headline in Victorian times in the Times saying, "Fog in the Channel, continent completely cut off." Of course, it was Britain that was completely cut off. But Britons were so egocentrical that they thought, if there's fog in the Channel, well, the continent is cut off. It's like, and that's kind of like the carbon taxes at the border. It's like, we'll put those, and if these countries like Belt and Road countries don't comply, well, then they cut off. No, we're cut off. All they're doing is you just handed them a discount on fossil fuels, and Africa will take that and industrialize. And what are they going to do with industrial economy? They're going to rip the heart out of our, ecological world.
Yeah.
So the ecosphere is going to be ripped apart by these Belt and Road countries.
Oh, absolutely.
And you have subsidized it by putting a tax on.
Right. So, and the GDP, I just want to state, is like a measurement of how much you're taking from the environment. The higher it is, the more environment is being destroyed. So.
Well, it's a fake figure, right? The domestic product is pure fantasy, but it leads concentration on the gross domestic product. There's a lot of things to say, we should have other measurements other than GDP. So it should be, well-being constants and things like that. And then scientists and kind of ivory tower type things, we should, include things like the cost to the environment should be negatives in a new GDP figure. It's all of this is kind of nonsense. It's not any way you account for it. The economy will find a way around, right? They will find a way so that they will destroy the environment and make it look good on the books. So if we carry on this thing where monetizing the Earth's the environment. If we monetize the environment and carry on down that path, it'll be a death by 1,000 cuts of trick accounting. And I'm very glad that apparently Greta seems to understand that. And she has mentioned how, trick accounting is the way that we will actually choke ourselves and gas ourselves with CO2.
And she's also talked about the fairy tale of eternal growth, which is important for people to understand. So I don't care if she's being paid by anybody. If she is, good for those people paying her, because she is actually trying to spread the truth. The problem I have is the people that only show tidbits of her speeches and don't. They'll leave out those parts about the fairy tale of eternal growth, and your politicians and your policies aren't going to solve this. We need the scientists to come in on it, and even then, I don't know.
No, the scientists will take us down a path that will kill us from a different way. So the scientists are dangerous as the economists in a way, and the part of it is they have no real world experience. So They don't understand how, basically industrial capitalism works and the dynamics of it. So they come up with things that, basically the science says, but they kind of have arrested understandings round about high school, it seems to me, because they all kind of goody two-shoes and they all imagine that it's all, just about being rational and collecting the data and presenting it, and then it'll, people will be sensible. And it's like, they don't understand what the capitalist economy is all about. And so they come up with things saying, well, the science says we have to keep 50% of the earth pristine in a reserve, and then we can only use 50%. You say, but the fundamental misunderstanding they have is that it's a perpetual growth economy, and it has to be. It has negative EROI. So basically, the energy return on energy invested, EROI or EROEI, is basically negative. So it has to borrow forward from the future, and that's why it's growing. It's growing to catch up with itself. So it's important. So if we did sequester half the planet as a natural reserve, it would only take a few generations of increase. Say, so basically, if we have a 10% growth rate, every 7 years we would double. So that other half would quickly come under pressure and overtake the other half. It would only take basically 7 years at a 10% growth rate. So that's how the scientists will kill us, by naivety.
Yeah, and also they all have their own ideas, or like James Hansen in wanting to implement nuclear power. There's scientists that disagree on what the solution should be, and you don't know who's being paid off by whom. The scientists that seem to understand the whole problem, they're not being paid by people, at least not Jim Massa. He's an independent. He's the guy who's on my show every Monday now. Well, he has been for the last four shows, but those people, the ones that really understand the problem, they're not going to be the ones brought in to make the solutions there. So what should we be demanding? Let's transfer over to XR since we're about halfway through, and I want to leave some time for questions for the people.
So the problem is that we are demanding stuff, and that's really where my daily gripe with and grind with XR comes from, is this fundamental notion that needs to be challenged, that's at the heart of XR, and that's that Roger Hallam's idea that the only entity powerful enough to cope with the climate emergency is national governments. And I'd say that needs to be questioned. The first thing you need to ask yourself is, why have they been so tardy and unresponsive to the emergency?
Now, they're paid off.
Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So you can run through a number of things why they look like they're being incredibly stupid, and certainly number 2 on the checklist would be that they're being paid off. But that doesn't make a lot of sense because they have kids too, as people point out.
They do.
Right? And so it doesn't make sense from a lot of angles. I grew up in the Cold War, and governments are hypersensitive to threats. They're paranoid. So we've gone through all of these things like the Cold War, where they've responded. If anything, they've overreacted to threats, and then suddenly we get to climate change, and suddenly nothing, no pulse. They don't even fog a mirror with climate change. And I don't think people are coming to the right conclusion. I think if you mull it over, there's a very obvious conclusion, and I think the evidence has been out there for a while. It's just too bleak for people to stare. It's just too dark for people to stare it in the face. And that's that. If you look at the government documents, the planning, everything since 1972, and the limits to growth, the dialogue, the liberal dialogue says, yeah, they heard Hansen in 1982 and they ignored him. I don't think they ignored him. In fact, I think that there's plenty of evidence that they didn't ignore the limits to growth. They didn't ignore Hansen. So then you say, well, why has there been so little action? Well, there's been a lot of action. What that action has been is in terms of the security forces, in terms of the analysis. If you look at the Council on Foreign Relations and those kind of think tanks, the neocons and all of their thinking, if you run it all the way back to about 1982 or even 72 to the limits of growth, they have tons, basically containers full of documents about how to cope with the coming crisis. And the climate crisis, the crisis of population and the climate crisis. And you won't see anywhere where they say, well, we should be mitigating the climate emergency. It's just how to handle the basically passively handle the effects of this coming catastrophe. And so it's as obvious as the nose on your face is that they concluded back at the limits of growth that there's nothing to be done. And that's why they're complacent, and that's what XR needs to wake up to. They've fallen into this narrative of the government is the authority, which is already very questionable. I mean, they are actually followers, not leaders. The corporate world actually leads more than the government today. And so, that's a very questionable thing of Hallam's, that the political entities and the state is supreme. But I would say that it doesn't make any sense, their posture, the way they've been behaving about the climate emergency. The only thing that's consistently rings true is that they've concluded long ago that there was no solution. If you say that, everybody says, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory," and they say, "Like,
I've heard that more than
all
once.
the evidence, but all the evidence is there in front of you." And so, I would say to people, what are you doing, lobbying the government? But anyway, I don't like the idea of treating the government as an authority, and thinking of this in terms of authorities. I think we got here because of authorities, and if we have any chance at all, it's removal of authority.
Yeah, isn't that what they're trying to do with the Citizens Assembly?
No, they're just transferring authority to this thing which they say is democracy, but they're saying, well, it's just a new authority and probably be worse. Really, what they're talking, they thinly disguised revolutionary councils is what they are. They say they go back to ancient Greece and basically that kind of early democracy, where but the citizen assemblies are actually just revolutionary councils. And the other blind spot they have about citizens assemblies is they think automatically that they can do a better job than the politicians. But the statistics are already in, and the average person in Britain, say, is much more conservative about the climate than even the government. So the government is actually more proactive about the climate than your average citizen. And there's plenty of studies and evidence that show that. So I don't really understand why XR thinks that citizens' assemblies are some kind of solution. I think there's a big mistake. They would be more conservative. They'd be less likely to do things that would... the one thing we need to do, of course, is to basically stop industrialization. The man in the street is far less likely to do anything to hurt the economy or industrialization than even politicians.
So we just need a collapse of the global industrial program, like everything.
We get that for free just by staying the course. But what I'd like to see us is to accelerate it. So I'm an accelerationist. I would say what XR could be doing is accelerating the collapse. But what they're trying to do is prevent it. And that's wrong from so many ways.
Yeah, I'm an accelerist too. I want to see it collapse. That's why I'm telling people don't freaking buy things. Why are you propping up all the the capitalists and everything? Just stop buying things. I don't know.
Well, that's individual action, and it can only go
Yeah, you can
so
only go so
far.
far, but and no one's
But the kind
listening.
of
Record sales for Christmas, so obviously no one's listening.
well, here's the way to look at it: is how much time and money does the average person spend actually shopping? Not that much. They spend a lot of their time actually working for the system. So they spend 40 hours a week, or more, maybe 80 hours in America, and
I
they
only work 40 myself.
yeah, but for a lot of people, 60 hours is the norm in the gig economy, and basically all these people in bullshit jobs. They have 3 jobs and stuff to try and maintain
Yes,
a
a
pretty
lot of people
lifestyle.
do. Yeah,
So the vast majority of people's time and income comes from working long hours at this work. So that's what you need to withdraw. So you basically what we need to do is to start a campaign of sabotage. Those people are propping the system up by working for it. You must basically the system means you have to work. You have to have an income. But it doesn't mean you can't sabotage and wreck it on the side, like basically wreckers did in the Soviet Union. So the Soviet system was authoritarian. It was horrible to live under. And a lot of people that were against it started a campaign of wrecking it, to the point where Stalin, had to start shooting people with a charge of wrecking. So wrecking became a very, very serious offense. The reason it became a serious offense was because it was so effective. It was going to bring down communism by the fact that basically the industrial economy was going to be brought down. So we need to resurrect that in the West.
and
And so
what would that look like?
basically, well, you have a lot of leeway. A lot of people are just acting as a counterbalance. I mean, the simplest thing, if you're an executive or middle manager or have a position like that as a white collar worker, you don't even have to do monkey wrenching. There are armies of people now that are basically acting as counterbalances for all these psychopathic CEOs. And so, you have these guys like Donald Trump, in these positions of power, pure psychopaths. I mean, according to Robert Hare's definition, they are clinical psychopaths. I'll prove it to you if you think I'm being melodramatic, or
No.
you think, oh, sociopaths maybe. No, psychopaths. They fit the definition perfectly. They check all the boxes. So you have these guys like Donald Trump, and then you have these armies of people around saying, don't worry, we've got your back. We make sure he's not doing any damage. Don't. Encourage him in his destruction. And every CEO that has boards, and they have executive teams that are compensating for their mania. Just stop doing that. Just start encouraging these CEOs to be themselves. Just tell them, why stop there, Bob? Why don't you, double down on that crazy fantasy? And then we'd be getting somewhere. Basically, people have to stop supporting the system. Just withdrawing support for it would be a great first step. And then it goes all the way to the point where you actually start monkey wrenching and start having a campaign of stealth to make the gears just jam up.
And what would that be?
So the very first thing to do is to identify all the points of sensitive dependence in the system. And they are very, very sensitive. So I've mentioned a few of these on Reddit, but the kind of example that you're looking for is things like really bottlenecks in the system. So if you look like, say, a wartime planner back in, say, World War II, there was basically a lot of people's job was to try and find points of vulnerability in the enemy system and to try and exploit them. And one of them that they found was ball bearings. They suddenly realized that ball bearings were in everything, and they were about 80% of them were made in the Schweinfurt factory. They sent raids out, 2 raids. They lost a lot of bomber crews, but they were dreadfully effective. Speer, the Ministry of Manufacture, said that the war would have ended in 3 months if they had have carried on those raids.
Oh, wow.
So very, very lucky they didn't. But to give you another example, on the other side, there was this generator under Grand Central Station called M42. And it was so sensitive, a bottleneck for the D-Day invasions, that it was under maximum security. Anybody infiltrating that would have been shot dead on sight. And the reason was that it just generated electricity for the Northeast. So all these troops were funneling in, going to Britain for D-Day. And the only place they could disembark was really in New York. And underneath Grand Central Station, secretly, the electricity for all the rail network was generated by these few generators, what they called, and this substation was called M42. It basically only needed a handful of sand. A saboteur could have poured a handful of sand into the generator. That would have ended the D-Day invasions. Probably they would have had to be delayed till 1945, wow. And we would have lost the war. Now, here's the interesting thing. The Germans knew about it. One of the guys who worked in that station went, before the war, defected to Germany and told the Nazis about the crucial sensitivity of this thing. Hitler sent 4 saboteurs that were landed by submarine on the East Coast, and they went to try and sabotage that. They came very, very close to sabotaging it. They were actually identified and picked up, and 2 were shot, 2 went to prison till the 1950s. But Hitler came very, very close to winning World War II with those 4 guys.
Wow.
And this incredible story is not really known, but the point is that in those days, the system wasn't as fragile as it is today. And in those days, there were such sensitive points of dependence that a handful of sand could have cost the Allies the war. Now, you imagine today how much more sensitive it is. Think of all the guys in these data centers, in these gas trading hubs, in all these points of infrastructure. There are people sitting on a button. They kind of, guys in the original Office movie where, it's the guy in the basement thinking, basically the social outcast thinking, I have the button in front of me that could end civilization just at the flick. And I'm saying we need to either get those guys to flick the buttons, or otherwise they need to basically dox them and document them so that other people can do it. But that's at the stage that we're actually at. And
it's pretty desperate right now. Yeah.
What else? So it all depends on how advanced you think the emergency is. But as far as I can see, I think we are very, very far advanced. And if you look at things like the Arctic is a net carbon emitter, we're about at a tipping point on the Amazon. I think we've passed tipping points. And
Australia.
I think at the moment, if everybody started a wrecking campaign, a popular wrecking campaign, it would be a kind of Hail Mary pass. But that's all we have left to do is to stop the industrial machine.
But a lot of people will die in that process, but a lot of...
Well, not as many as you think. And then that becomes a big thing that I think you discussed with Derek Jensen. Derek Jensen gets a lot of this and says, well, a lot of people will die. You say, well, great, but everybody's going to die if we carry on.
Yes, yeah. That's the point I was going to get to, but I let you make it instead.
Yeah. but anyway, if your defense is like, you can't switch off this casino because lots of people are surviving of it, you may as well. That's a pathetic moral argument. It's like saying, no, we can't end slavery because otherwise who's going to feed the slaves? All the slave masters give the slaves a bowl of rice a day. Where are they going to get their bowl of rice a day?
The economy. We got to have more people because we need people to grow the economy. So all the people having all these babies, like have babies, and all they are is a tool to grow the economy, destroy the planet, and support the elite. That's it.
Yeah, nobody mentions that the fact that overpopulation was a result of capitalism. It was
Yes.
basically every authoritarian leader. If you go back to Mussolini and Hitler and basically the Americans in the 50s, everybody was encouraged to have babies because there were posters, basta basta posters in that Mussolini had, because every industrial power suffered a labor shortage. There was my family went out to South Africa. I was born in South Africa. They went out to South Africa because of the chronic labor shortage. So basically, the world, while it was industrializing, had tremendous demand for labor. It's only just stopped now with automation. And now basically there's a surplus of labor, and they're pushing people into busy work and bullshit jobs and what they call the service economy. But it really is just really surplus to requirements. The service economy, they could send everybody home tomorrow and it wouldn't affect the economy in the slightest.
Oh, absolutely. Do you want to get to questions, or did you have any more points? We're
Oh
42
no, I've been
minutes.
going great guns. Let's see if anybody's got some questions.
Okay, I'm a little early, so if you have questions, let's say hello while I'm waiting. Hey, Oz. Oz is here. Um, let's see. Trisha, Osama, Scott Marteau, Torstein, um,
Oh,
Val.
hi guys, I recognize a lot of those names.
Oh yeah, of course you would. Cindy Seeley. Yes.
this is
She
this
we
is a very very closed community. I wish more people were doomers.
I know, but we're gaining in this community every day. We're getting more people. Cindy Seeley is asking about global dimming. I'm not sure if that's a serious question. Maybe she's new, doesn't understand what global dimming is. Will you explain that really quick while I look for more
Okay, so,
questions?
so well, the important thing about global dimming is the McPherson paradox. So, for a long time, even since the 50s, some people have noticed that solar radiation has been minimized because of sulfates in the atmosphere. So basically, pollution.
Mhm.
The key study, I think, was this guy in 1948 in Israel, who did solar measurements to see how much sunshine there were, because they knew that basically the Israeli agriculture would have to be irrigated, and he had to find out how much irrigation they would require. So he had to know how much evaporation there was. So he did all these experiments in 1948, and then he came back later in the 70s, and he thought, well, what the hell? I'll just have a look again and see how the measurements have changed. And he was absolutely horrified that the solar radiation reaching the Earth was about 30% less than 1948. And various people were coming to the same conclusion, that solar radiation management and evaporation was chronically hampered. They didn't quite know why, but it was soon pinned down on pollution. So
Right,
that's where the
from
global dimming
9/11,
effect.
when they shut down all air travel in the U.S., the temperatures raised.
Yeah,
Was it a degree? I think it was a degree or something like that.
yeah, and the same. McPherson says the same happened with when they went over to nuclear in France. That caused a noticeable spike in local temperatures. But there was a in the islands in the Philippines. There was a very direct result where they could see it, and that was these two islands that were, or one island that was upstream from two industrial centers. So one had an industrial center, and then very similar, just slightly south from that, had basically clean air without any industry on it. Similar island upstream, and then they clearly showed that there was about a degree difference if you were downstream from an industrial area. So that was very definitive. But anyway, Hansen came out and did a defining paper, I think, in about 2003 on it, and he pointed out that, look, if we quit all this industrial activity, we're going to raise the temperature. He said about zero point 0.8 of a degree Celsius, and 1 degree Fahrenheit about, and he said, well, you got to add that in to the, basically global heating. The IPCC does that. They do actually, if you have a look on the charts, they do have a little bar graph where it's the temperature sensitivity of the Earth is actually reduced by the global dimming effect. They have a little blue negative bar there. So they do take it into account. It's not very clear whether they're taking it into account enough, but Macpherson it's really dominated his whole life to the global dimming effect and what he calls the Macpherson paradox, that if we do shut down all the power stations and they stop putting out sulfates in the air, basically we would have about a degree warming, so we're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
So he thinks, you can't stop industrial civilization because otherwise we're going to go extinct sooner, which is like saying, I can't stop drinking now because I'm going to have a hell of a hangover anyway. It's like
I agree.
it's not logical to say that, and it's very anthropocentric to say that, because you say, well, this is all about us and us going extinct. And I think there's more on the table than that. I would also say that nobody really knows. It's a complicated effect. It's not simply that all the soot basically
just drops out.
The sun, basically, because if it was just blocking out the sun, then the soot would absorb all the solar radiation and it would turn into heat. It would just be slightly above the ground, maybe about 1,000 feet above the ground. And so it would be factored into satellite measurements of the temperature. Now, the reason it isn't is because it's actually quite complicated. What those sulfates do is they cause moisture in the air, and the moisture raises the albedo of the Earth. So it reflects the solar radiation back into space. Although radiation from the pollution from the ground looks dense and black, from space it's actually brighter and reflects back. But now, water vapor itself is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. So this quickly gets really complicated, and various models say various results. They just had this one thing from Jerusalem University saying it's way worse than we thought. It's twice what we thought. It's like 2 degrees. These other guys came back, said, no, what it does is when you take it out, there are more clouds, and those compensate for the albedo, and there's almost no global dimming effect.
Yeah, so it's no use counting on that.
The net result is Macpherson is overplaying this. He shouldn't have based his whole life on this. There's not enough data, and we shouldn't. And basically, as things stand, we know what happens if we carry on emitting CO2. If we keep these coal-fired power stations going, then we absolutely know what the effect is. We don't know the effect of stopping them. And if on the off chance that we said, oh no, big mistake, you can start them up again tomorrow. But basically, the coal fields in China that have been burning for about 20 years now. They can't put them out. Basically, they're burning underground. Even in America.
That's happening in Utah too.
In Utah too. They've had these fires burning in coal fields since the 50s. And, you could just ignite all the open coal fields if you really wanted to make a big dimming effect. So it's a nonsense argument. We have to stop industrial civilization, and it's an afterthought. The global dimming effect and all the people around Macpherson that make a big hoo-ha out of it is say, there's not enough data to make a hoo-ha, and even if there was, we have to kick the habit. It's no excuse for carrying on.
Right. Okay.
That's it. That's global dimming. Sorry.
There you go. No, that was a very in-depth answer, so appreciate that a lot.
So more in-depth than she probably wanted. But
probably. Okay, so, by the way, hi, CB joined us, and Ben Wilbur has a question. Have you heard about Victor Schauberger's work? I don't know if I said that right. Schauberger's?
No. What's that?
Schaubergers.
Is he the economist?
I don't know, Ben. Is he the economist? Let's see. Any more questions? Oh my gosh. Slow down. Where was I? Oh, okay, there I am. What about the one Kaz Kazakhstan. I can't say Kazakhstan. That's hard to say. That was lightning rod. I don't know what the one is.
Borat. Something to do with Borat.
Oh, okay. All right. Torsten has a question. Lord, have you looked more into the vulnerabilities database run by the one of XR's thinkers, Buddhists?
Yeah, so there's this thing called truthteller.org or truthteller.net. And they've Gail's mentioned it, Roger Hallam's mentioned it. I don't know if how much it's being used, but what it was set up for was for doxing vulnerabilities in the system, on the basis that it was kind of and also being a whistleblower site for Exxon knew yonks ago, or Exxon doesn't care and all of this stuff. But I don't think that that's very useful. Everybody knows the system is fragile, but what that site could be used for is for exactly what I'm saying, is having people dox vulnerabilities in the system, so that if basically there are really people that are prepared to use a variety of tactics, these points, nodal points, basically should be out there and known, and they could be done on a very benign kind of basis, very unthreatening way, to say, no, I'm a goody two-shoes, I'm a good citizen, just telling you about a vulnerability in the system.
Yes.
That if you go there, basically the key's under the mat, you just take the key, put it in the thing, flip the switch, and I'm just saying that, the state needs to know about that, because it's a security hole. And then if we have a huge catalog of those, at some point people are going to wake up, and then they're going to be more than enough people to actually hamstring the system.
Nice.
But it would be really good to have a database like that to tell people that are, basically you get different categories of people. Then a lot of people can actually point fingers, spread information about the vulnerabilities in the system. Basically, people can develop target lists. There's quite a different mindset that goes into actually targeting these things. And so, basically we should collaborate on those first. We basically should get those points out, and it's fine if it's done on the basis of we're just good citizens, just pointing out to people just how fragile this is and preparing for deep adaptation. Well, part of deep adaptation is sticking a monkey wrench in these things.
I like that. Okay, Cindy just had a comment. She said, "Good point, Lord Hugh. Start industry backup if we need to cool it down." Thank you, Cindy. That was good. And thank you, Torstein, for your question. That was an excellent question with an excellent answer. Let's see. Victor Schauberger, an Austrian forest caretaker, naturalist, Paris scientist, philosopher, inventor, and biomimicry experimenter. Schauberger developed his own ideas based on what he observed in nature.
Oh, okay. So he's a kind of polymath. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't really know about him, but he sounds a bit like E.O. Wilson and those kind of guys. Is he from any kind of particular school of thought, like the cyberneticists or the post-humanists or anything, or is he just his own kind of geodesic dome fella?
It doesn't really say in that comment, so we may have to look into that later and try to get into the mimicking nature, the biomimicry. What do you? Well, there's another question.
I can tell you. Yeah, this is more this crazy stuff that drives me wild, like CRISPR and all of that. We're heading off into the twilight zone. These people are crazy. They talk about, we could have artificial trees and stuff like that. And say, why? We've got real trees.
I know.
Why does everything have to be substituted and artificial and engineered?
Yeah, nature can do it so much better.
But I'll tell you a big danger about biomimicry and that's this kind of forgotten thing from the 80s called Biosphere 2. So Biosphere 2, I believe, it's considered a big failure because they couldn't get it to work. But I think that a lot of people took some lessons from Biosphere 2, including governments. And it's worth looking at because I think that Biosphere 2 encouraged governments to think that there is no way out of the climate predicament. But it was forgotten in mainstream science because what was supposed to be was, do you remember what Biosphere 2 was? So basically in the 80s, they got this huge, really glass house that was supposed to be, Biosphere 1 is the Earth. They made Biosphere 2 as completely sealed environment where they mimicked all of Earth's systems. They put about 12 people in, and then they tried to, they had oceans and they had plants, and they tried to mimic the deserts and the jungles and everything. And it was a prelude to having off-world colonies. So if these had worked, they would have taken them into space and to colonize Mars and things like that. It failed miserably, and the reason why it failed was because of CO2. Basically, the guys couldn't sustain themselves. They got thinner and thinner. The whole politics, it all completely broke up. They had to leave the biosphere, but they had insects like ants started to run wild, and they had to sneak in CO2 scrubber. It was basically like a big submarine, and they were forced to put in a CO2 scrubber, which is basically straight out of a submarine. I think they got it from.
Oh, wow.
And so what it encouraged, I think, government scientists to think was that those kind of space colonies, suddenly you hear talk about space colonies that I had in my youth suddenly dried up after that. It went down in the media and the popular imagination as a failure because we thought, oh, this is all part of the Star Trek future. And then when it all collapsed and burned, it was all kind of an embarrassment and everybody swept it under the rug. I think there's a faction of people that didn't take it and sweep it under the rug. I personally think it was a great success as an experiment because it proved the scale that you could have a biosphere, and it just happens to be the size of the biosphere. You cannot make this biosphere smaller. So it was a great scientific result, and I think some people got the message, and I think it affected government policy, but it's just a hunch. Anyway, go and have a look at Biosphere 2. That is seriously good education.
That is interesting. I absolutely will. Let's get as many questions as we can.
That it failed because of the CO2. They couldn't control the CO2, and that's why it failed.
That I'm going to look into that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Biosphere 2, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we may go a little over because I want to get to our questions. So Oz LaFave asked, do you think the U.S. empire will ever end their war making for profit, which is a huge contributor to the crisis?
They're gonna, you see, this is part of what gets me up in the morning and motivated, is trying to avoid a future which I think I've seen before. And I'm telling you, they will hold on to the bitter end. What is frightening, I don't think people realize, particularly collapsitarians, is how long the state can hang on for. It can hang on right to the bitter end. If you want to get a good insight into a state in collapse, look at Nazi Germany, and it's just horrific how the state behaved in the final days of the Reich. And that's what we headed for. I saw this in South Africa. We came very, very close to a Rwanda-style genocide. And my takeaway from living in the South African experience was Roger Hallam and XR, you absolutely, fundamentally underestimating the power of violence. Is basically white people were 20% of the population, and we held onto the country for decades by raw power of a gun.
Right.
Don't underestimate it. You are not being realistic with your Gandhi BS and stuff like that. It's basically that violence is powerful like you won't believe. Relatively few people can hold on to a big country. 80% of forget about 3.5%. In South Africa, 80% of the population was against the government, and they didn't make a dent. Why? Because of violence. Violence is important. It's you'll never get anywhere with NVDA. Just get over it. But sooner the better.
Yeah, I don't think we'll get anywhere. Anyway.
But just one more thing while I'm having a rant here. Whoever asked that question, it's well worth looking at Rebecca Solnit and Paradise is Built in Hell is her book. It's about San Francisco and Katrina, and it gives you a good idea about how your worst enemy in collapse is the state. We really have to neutralize and anesthetize, quarantine states before collapse gets too far, because the state is not your friend. You'll find that out during the collapse. Right.
They'll be trying to control you and the resources, whatever they might be. But Chris Foster, it's kind of related. If we crash the industrial economy, what do we replace it with?
Nothing. What do you replace cancer with? You replace cancer with what?
Yeah.
This is an old anarchist question.
Yes, anarchy.
Anarchists have always responded to this with, what do you replace cancer with? So, and there's another related thing is saying, like, how can we do with electricity? Look, we've only had electricity for 100 years, and 2 billion people don't have electricity. It's basically, we were doing fine without electricity.
We can survive without electricity. We won't be able to do this, but I'm okay with that.
We don't need to. If we only have to do this because of electricity. It's what separated us.
Yes.
We would be next door neighbors if we didn't have electricity, right?
Yep. Baya has a good comment. Life equals suffering. Someone will always suffer, or everyone will.
No. This is Jordan Peterson.
Oh no, is it Jordan Peterson?
Life. This is what Jordan Peterson said. Jordan Peterson has got this rant on video going, life is suffering. That's what the religious people always told us. And say, yes, Jordan, that's what the religious people told you. Why? Because they're in cahoots with the slave owners. This is a labor camp. We are not supposed to suffer in a labor camp. No. Basically, we weren't suffering before industrialization. The hunter-gatherers didn't suffer.
Right.
Go and have a look at the Puraha people. They're the happiest people in the world. Why? Because they can only count to 3.
I like that. Okay, let's see. Professor Peter Newman and British expert and Copenhagen Uni on climate change and the burning of Australia. I guess Trisha has a good link on there. Let's see. Guess on timeline for full collapse in the West. Thank you, Trish Kaiser. Do you have a guess for the timeline? Full collapse in the West?
So, yeah, this is a dangerous game to play because it's really complex. I'm not good at timelines. I'm great at telling you what's going to happen, but it's an order of magnitude to tell you when, and it's kind of a fool's game because you just have to get a dry twig and bend it over your knee. You know it's going to break at some stage.
Right.
But it's very, very hard to call it. I remember when I was in my 20s in South Africa. It's a very complex situation, kind of like the same question. And then people knew we were heading for genocide, and that question was phrased as, how long would it take to get a black government? In other words, basically we would probably be wind up, shot, dead. And basically there'd be a revolution and we'd be superseded. So people generally said, not in my lifetime. Young people in their 20s said, not in my lifetime. I had vicious arguments with people, and I said, no, 10 years. And I was wrong. It was actually 6. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, guessing is hard, but okay, so they're saying 30 years, like in major media that it could
happen. Don't make any plans beyond 2050, I can say that.
Yeah, so we're pretty close. I mean, and it can happen much faster. So
it's happening much faster. Yeah, it's exponential. You see, what these people are doing is they're thinking of it as too gradual, but the scientists are kind of being coy about the fact that everything's coupled. It's closely coupled, and it's actually getting more coupled, not decoupled. So when it goes, they're not only feedback loops, they're close couplings. And in a scale-free network, you only need a few preferential nodes to go, and the whole thing's gone. So basically, what scientists are being coy about is that collapse is going to come abruptly. And everybody, the conversation is all, IPC says by 2100 we should have this, and all the graphs are so damn smooth and stuff. It's like, forget it. If you see a smooth graph, you're talking to an idiot because he doesn't understand
You're like a
systems.
hockey stick or a check mark.
Yeah, it's an exponential growth. It's been an exponential growth for a long time, and that's they don't show you exponential graphs.
No, they don't. Cornholio is here. Welcome, Cornholio. Glad you made it. He never makes it to my live streams because of time differences. So let's see if there's any more questions because we're already over. But I want to see if I can get. See if there's any more. I stopped the comments where I was so I wouldn't miss any. Tricia has a comment. Prime Minister had to cut short holiday. Scotty. Oh wait, never mind. I thought that was
The
something
Prime Minister of Australia was in Hawaii and he had to fly back. But there again, why do we care? It's again this attention to authority figures. We've got to get over it. There's no solution in authority figures, guys. Forget about what the authority figures do. Forget about what Trump and Boris and all of these guys do. The only authority figures you need to care about are Xi Jinping, Jair Bolsonaro, Mahendra Modi. And basically, you only need to care about them because they need to be.
Yeah, they need to. I'm not going to say that out loud, but yeah, I agree. Donald McCarthy is here. Cool.
Yay.
Sky News Australia is still denying anything out of the ordinary. Bomb massaging, or is it BOM massaging figures to conceal greater heat in the past. What the fuck? Yeah, I can't believe Sky News Australia is like in denial, complete and total denial. It's wow.
It's basically it's because they've survived on China and mining, and so they stuck, they're cornered, they're trapped.
Yep, I think we're all kind of painted into a corner.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oz is posting a link of some variety. Amazon.
Anyway, the only reason why they've got fires in Australia is because they don't do forest management and they don't sweep up the pine needles properly.
Oh, God. They'd be better off if we just stayed out of the forest because what we have been doing has made it worse. And plus, the warming allows for those beetles to overwinter. The pine beetles, and then there's more of them the next season, so they're killing more trees and making them more vulnerable to fire.
No jokes. This friend of mine. Well, this guy I know, who's a billionaire friend of Theresa May. He's got one foot in Australia, one foot in South Africa, one foot in the UK. But anyway, this guy sends out emails to his email list, and I just like to be on it because I can see how the 1% think. And he sends all this stuff out saying that the fires in Australia are caused by, wait for it, because all these green people are preserving forests. So basically, if you have a look at the growth in the amount of forests in Australia, they've been going up and up, and so have the fires. And that's the reason. If we allowed logging, we wouldn't have these fires now. Ta-da!
God. I don't know what to say about that.
It's like, you left the trees up. Well, you shouldn't complain. Now they're burning, all you green people.
That is insane.
That's the way they think, man. Everything's upside down for them. Everything's upside down for them.
Well, they are on top. Yeah.
According to him, he's a wealth creator. Because nobody will get off their ass and basically build a civilization without people like him.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That's why I have no hope for this planet. Zero. It's things like that. And I can't even convince people in my family that this is a real thing happening. Oh, they said it was, we were going to be overpopulated back in the 70s. It hasn't happened yet. The hell hasn't happened yet. Oh my God.
Think how many people, that predicted the apocalypse, and all of them were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, that means apocalypse can't happen.
Y2K, it's like, we're all gonna die or something major's gonna happen in Y2K because of the computers or something. And it was like, I didn't even blink an eye. I didn't care.
Well,
like, oh, well, whatever power goes out, do I really care? Do I give a shit? No.
Millenarians in the past were always wrong, but basically, the thing about prophets of doom is they only have to be right once. Basically, people that are Whiggish and have this progressivism, then they have to be right every single time.
Yep. Oh, I don't. Yeah, I understand that I will be wrong often. So whatever, you can be wrong. It's okay to accept the fact that you can be wrong and learn something new. But a lot of people don't have that mindset. They just think they need to be right, and that's more important than getting to the truth. So there's that.
Yeah, the truth is pretty scary. I got to admit, it gets scary.
Scary. Yeah, it's very scary.
Every now and again, I must admit that I do lapse, and I just think, oh man, I want to be one of these guys. I just want to think like them and not worry.
I know. Ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah, no, but this billionaire guy, he says, I don't know what's wrong with these people. They think in austerity, and they think in a small way, and reduce. He says, live abundantly. That's what I tell everybody. Live abundantly. This is a billionaire, right? He just consumes half the planet. He says, I don't know why people don't listen to me. It's much better to live abundantly than have all this sort of austerity that people want to impose on themselves. He said, this is literally what he says. And again, I thought,
psychopath.
You know what? I just want to be him. I'm getting sick of this too much,
right?
Too much truth. I want a bit of denial.
Wouldn't that be nice to live in that land of denial?
As a billionaire,
it's a paradise in denial. Let's see.
Yeah, I think we're being the stupid ones. I really do sometimes.
Oh my gosh, Donald thinks we look like brother and sister. Kind of doomer carpenters.
Well, that's a great compliment to me, and a real diss to you.
Okay, you're officially my older brother. I hope you're older.
I'm getting really senior rights now. When I go down to the shop here in Greece, twice now they've given me these comforter blankets for free. I'm getting like sad old man status now.
I'm 6 years away from being a senior. 6 years. If I make it to be a senior,
What's a senior?
In 64? Here, you get your senior discount at 55.
Okay, I'm 54, so I'm going to move to Utah. And
it's not. You don't get your benefits like Social Security or anything until your 60s, 70s. I'll never see that, but you'll get discounts in stores and restaurants and stuff.
Yeah, if you had buses, you get 50% on that. Hey, all that stuff is going away. In Greece, it's going away. Get used to that, man. They all the seniors here, they just lost their 50% discount on the buses.
I think seniors get a free national parks pass too here, so they can go into all the national parks.
In Greece, you go to all the parks for free. It's just dumb tourists that get hit up from parks and
the U.S. is stupid. They charge you a fortune. I think it's $75 for a day pass or something. Normally.
What? Like Yosemite?
Yeah. I think so. I never go into those big parks. I go into the national forest, but I don't go into the big national parks on a regular basis. Did I say hi to Human yet? I don't know. Hi, Human, in case I didn't say hello to you. Thank you for coming. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, I just lamenting that money doesn't go to the environment. It just goes straight to the treasury.
Oh, and it goes to build more roads and trails and stuff like that instead of actually helping. And then they pack people into these national parks. They pack them in. They're so busy. So in a way, I'm kind of happy they charge more for it because they are so packed. They're insanely packed. They have to limit some places because there's just too many people.
Yeah, Yosemite is a car park now, isn't it?
Human has a poem called Painted into a Corner. Sounds like a good poem. Yeah, Oz, thank you. Please hit the thumbs up. Please, please. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I'm trying to hit 1,000. I am so close. I am under 100 left to go. So help
You've
me
got
out.
almost 1,000 subscribers?
Huh?
You've got almost 1,000 subscribers?
Yeah, I'm at 937 last time I looked. So
Cool.
I'm getting there. I really need it so I can stream live. I can give you messages, in the feed on YouTube, and if I like have to cancel a video or if I have something coming up, I can let you know.
Would you promote my book? I'm just about finished my novel on climate change, and as soon as I release it for small money, maybe even free.
Oh, nice. Where's it gonna be at? Is it gonna be an ebook or is it gonna be an actual?
Yeah, I'll probably put it one of those things where you can just self-publish as an ebook or whatever those things are.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, what's gonna be the name of it? Did you already say that and I was distracted?
No, it's called St. George and the Methane Dragon.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, it's basically climate change, basically collapse imagined from a Greek island point of view, but it's not all doom and gloom. And it has a black swan in it, which I think is rather intriguing. Basically, I was very pleased that I
Val
thought of
should
this.
like that. I don't know if I said hi to Val, but anyway, it has a black swan, so there's it's
Yeah, so I was very pleased to think up a black swan because it made me feel that it's complicated thing about collapse and the climate, and so it's nice that if I could think up one plausible one, there are probably others out there, and that's kind of nice.
That makes you feel a little bit better. But I still want to see civilization collapse.
Oh yeah,
Because
me too. No, it doesn't mean civilization doesn't collapse. It just means that collapse might not be quite what you think.
Yep. Okay. Torstein's promoting your book. You put the title of it down there for you. Thank you, Torstein, for cheering me on. I love it. And if you haven't subbed to Going South, do that too. And also, Lord Hugh are a dumbass on YouTube is Lord's channel, and
Escape with Lord Hugh are a Doombar.
Oh yeah, that's right. I always miss that first part. Escape.
Yeah, and also CCTV, Climate Change TV.
Yes, FrozenEarth.com. So check that out. I don't know if I said a load of lightning rod. Who else did I see? Book Hermit is here. Late, but Book Hermit's here. Thing about finding truth is recognizing it once you stumble across it. Yeah, good point. Let's see. Trisha, I think I said we all need infrared glasses to see the methane around us. Methane dragon. Sorry, I'm reading comments. As far as the economy goes, it just depends on how long we keep letting the ultra rich print themselves endless money. Yeah, well, there's that. I mean, they're paying off the banks right now, like the big.
That's one thing is look out on December the 31st. There could be a little wrinkle in the matrix on that score.
New Year's Eve.
Yeah, the banks have to have minimum reserves when they close their books on December the 31st, and it looks like some egregious players, maybe J.P. Morgan and a few others, have they short on cash, and that's part of the reason why the Fed has been pumping billions a day into the markets. But the Fed has been buying up on the repo market. And all is not good.
Yeah, no.
In September, the overnight rate went to 10%, which is sort of a debacle.
Oh no, I think Lightning Rod's a big fan. He says you're a hero. You are all heroes and prophets to me. You are serving humanity. So thanks for that. That's awesome of you to say, Lightning Rod.
Very nice.
There's already enough wrinkles in the matrix, says Trisha.
No, they're not enough. They got to be more. Then we need to have cracks. We need to start chiseling at them, man.
Exactly. We need to find the glitch and put
Put a
a
crowbar in
crow.
it.
Yeah,
If
that's
you
what I
find
was
a
gonna
chink in the
say.
matrix, put a crowbar in it now.
They would just keep getting endless zero interest loans. Yeah. Why 2020K? Torstein. Um, Scott worked with the banks and international settlements will take care of everything. Long live Bretton Woods.
Yeah,
Oh,
the BIS is getting nervous. Deutsche Bank is in trouble. Things are not looking good. No, everybody knows that this house of cards is coming down, and nobody quite knows how. And the reason is MMT. They can just print money up the yin yang, but they can't print it out indefinitely. Because if you watch my very first episode of my very first video, I explain how the financial system works, and what MMT people don't realize is we actually pay 6% on our money. We pay 6% interest. So the national debt is not for free, and we've got to the end. We can't service that 6% anymore.
yeah. This is.
No, it's
I'd
nothing to
like
be.
to see that. It's a
It's
good
nothing
thing.
to be depressed about.
No, I want to see
You should
that.
be
I'm sighing
smiling.
because I get excited about something like that and then it never happens.
Well, yeah, the financial collapse is the thing that just carries on never happening in the most remarkable way. Um, yeah, but just like the climate is collapsing, the financial system is collapsing too, and nobody's really looking very hard at it. But
Right.
there's serious cracks in it.
Right. So we're over by about 23 minutes. I do have chores to get to. So I'm going to let you have any last word, anything else you want to say to our lovely people. Gosh, all you guys, thank you so much for coming on a Saturday. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks for moving the time, and yeah, I had a lot of fun. So thanks for letting me rant a bit. It was kind of nice.
It's always fun to rant, right? I get off on ranting. It just makes me feel so much better after I
Yeah,
get
I feel
off.
good. I hope I didn't lean on everybody and make them feel bad at the end of my rant, but
Oh, I
yeah,
don't think so.
I've enjoyed I've enjoyed spouting.
Okay, this Gaia Smith is here. We won't like the new Stone Age. Probably not, but what do you do? Um,
Oh no, you'll love it. You'll love it. Just go and read up on how it used to be. It's fantastic.
yeah. Oh, I'm happy to live in a more simple life. I would love it so
it's
much.
hunting and fishing, and everybody pays big money to go on hunting and fishing holidays now. You used to get them for free. It's
I
way
love
better.
camping. I love being off grid, so
So do I.
it's just the thing. So William Martyr is here. You came late. Okay, watch the replay, William. Thanks for coming. Love you much. Um, one more comment. Okay, I'm done after this. Extinction is exciting and it won't disappoint.
That's good. I like
Yes.
it. This is the finale. This is the most exciting reel. Don't miss this one. It's going to be
Oh,
great.
absolutely. Oh, wait, I have to read Oz's comment because, he's my engineering stuff, my partner in crime. He says, "Thank you, Lord Hugh. Will you join us again soon?"
I'd love to. Yeah. Hey, especially to promote my novel.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I will
If
definitely.
somebody's dumb enough to read it, maybe we could discuss it. That would be cool.
Right. Oh, shoot. I forgot to set up the. Oh, no, I don't have to do that anymore. Dad, my thing is working. All right. Say goodbye. Guys, have a good weekend and happy holidays. Hopefully it's a giftless holiday
Oh
and just
yeah. Happy
enjoy time
holidays
with
to
friends.
you, everybody.
Yeah. All right. I'll see you Monday. Talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, crap. That was bad. That was bad ending. Okay, try it again. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.